In this unit, we look at the first step in a systematic approach to biomedical design, validating the clinical need. Identifying a clinical need is the first stage in this process, and this can happen in a number of ways. If you are lucky enough to be part of a structured fellowship program, like the Stanford Biodesign Program, BioInnovate, Ireland, Design Health Barcelona, or other similar programs, you spend a great deal of time in the clinical setting identifying and filtering clinical needs. However, more commonly, clinical needs come from direct contact with clinical end users, industry know-how, or perhaps even first-hand experience. For example, Mike Brady at Oxford University developed his image fusion technology after his mother-in-law died from breast cancer. The company, Mirada Medical, is now a global leader in medical image fusion. Once a need has been identified, the next step is to assign it a clinical champion. This should be an expert in the field and, ideally, one with whom you can form a relationship which is sustainable and collaborative. The ideal clinical champion needs to recognize the need, but also recognize the need for solutions to the problem identified. Once you have a clinical champion, he or she becomes a key facilitator in clinical need validation, providing the link between the design team and the wider clinical community. This can happen in a number of ways. Interviews, either virtually or face-to-face, with key opinion leaders are a highly effective means of generating clinical validation. Use public resources such as pubmed.gov to identify key opinion leaders who are widely published in the clinical field where the need is identified. Many clinicians will be willing to take a call, possibly for a small fee, and offer independent and impartial opinions on the identified need. Focus groups require more planning and logistical organisation, but can be very helpful to tease out questions which are unanswered by the key opinion leaders. Focus groups are also an opportunity to include industry as well as clinical input. A second important advantage of focus groups is that it can offer input from across the clinical training spectrum. For example, first-year specialist trainees are often far more acutely aware of the challenges posed by current clinical needs than experienced clinicians. A third way to validate a clinical need is to explore its relevance in the clinical literature. Again, PubMed.gov or Google Scholar are invaluable, using systematic keyword searching to identify reviews and case studies which identified the clinical need. Published literature is useful to determine the macro view of the clinical need. For example, geographical prevalence, number of cases, patient population, and so on. However, it usually does little to point to possible solutions. Industry reports are another external and macro approach to clinical need validation. However, reports are usually proprietary, expensive, and, while useful in quantifying the potential market opportunity, may be of little use to create a convincing argument for a solution to an existing clinical need. By now, you should have a clearer picture of the clinical need, its prevalence, scope, and severity. This input needs to be recorded in a methodical fashion, as it can potentially form part of future regulatory submissions. In addition, it will provide the supporting background for future IP protection around your design solution. Next time, we look to capture this need in a clear and succinct way.